So I saw that Robin didn't set everything to pre-reading for this week. So I've set everything to pre-reading now. So sorry you can read up on what we're gonna do today. Um, yeah, we're just gonna be going over more array methods, and we're gonna be talking about multi-dimensional arrays today. So it's not gonna be too bad. Um, but before we do that, I will do two questions from last night. So the first one will be what is it? Odd couple. So constant odd couple is going to be equal to a function. This function will look like this. Now, odd couple is supposed to take an array of numbers. And what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to return an array of up to two odd numbers, the first two that we find, right? So the first thing we could do is we could say let odds equal an array, because we know that once we find these odd numbers, we're going to push them into this array, because that's how you. Wait, hold on a second. I'm not sharing my screen, am I?
Nope.
No.
Wow, thanks for letting me know. Like,
I was just
10
typing.
minutes after. Oh my god.
I kept you talking through it.
Jesus. All right, look. If I'm doing something dumb and stupid, which is a lot of the times, just yell at me, all right? Also, if I have a typo, yell at me, because that'll just save time, okay? So, like I was saying, we have const odd couple, and it's going to take a nums, and we're going to say let odds equal an array, because we know that we have to initiate, just like if we were to concatenate things into an empty string, we would initiate an empty string, right? So we initiate an empty array, but instead of concatenating, we would be pushing things, right? Using the push method, because that's how you add things into an array from the back, okay? You don't do plus equals for an array, you do dot push. So now we can do our trusty for loop, and we could say let I is equal to 0, I is less than nums dot length, and I plus plus. Just a standard looking for loop, okay? Now we can say if nums, oh whoops, I forgot this thing right here. So we can say if nums of I, the current element that we're on, if nums of I mod 2 is equal to 1, that means it's odd, right? So if it's odd, we can say odds dot push nums of I. Does everyone agree? Because if nums of I mod 2 triple equals 1, that means that it's an odd number. So if it is an odd number, then we could put it into odds. Then there is one thing that we have to do before we return odds, right? Because we need up to the first 2, okay? So up to the first 2 means that we have to check the length after we push something in, okay? And after we push, wait for this to reload. So after we push something in, we need to do another check. We need to say if odds dot length is equal to 2, meaning there's 2 things in there, then we can return odds here. We can return odds here. Returning inside of a function stops the entire function. If it's in a loop, it stops the loop as well, because the function stops, right? So this will make sure that, okay, we have our odds, don't do anything else, return what we got. Otherwise, if we make it out of the loop, that means we either didn't find any odd numbers, or we only found 1 or something. So we could just return odds out here. Okay? Any questions about that? Yell it out if you have any questions. Pretty straightforward in my opinion. So now that I've done this, the other question you guys wanted me to do was my last index of, okay? So my last index of could be a little tricky. However, you already did my index of, I think, of the loop workshop, so you should kind of have an idea of what you need to do. So my last index of will be a function, and it is going to take an array, and it is going to take a search value, and it is going to take a start, okay? Because just like index of, my last index of can tell you where to start, okay? So, now, what do we do? Just like index of, the start parameter is optional, meaning I can, if I'm running your function, I can throw in an index of where I want you to start, but if I don't, I want you to start where? So this is the tricky part, right? We don't actually start from the beginning in my last index of, right? If we're looking for the last index, it would make sense to start from the back, right? So we start from the back and then we go to the beginning, because as we do a reverse for loop through our array, when we hit the thing we're looking for, that will be the last index because we started from the back, right? So if this wasn't passed in, it'll be undefined. So I could say like if start equals undefined like that or whatever, but I want to use the ES6 default parameters because that's always easier, right? So if start is equal to undefined, we could just put in start like this, start equals, and then it's going to equal array dot length -1. And yes, I can access this in here, okay? Any questions? Cool. So now we do our for loop, right? And just like in index of in the looping workshop, we do let I is going to be equal to start. Whoops. Whoops. Okay? And we do this until I is greater than or equal to 0 is no longer true. Okay? And after each iteration, we will decrement I. So we want I to be 0 because the first index of an array or even a string is 0. So we need to hit the 0 number. So if I is greater than or equal to 0, what breaks that? If it's negative, right? So when we decrement from 0 and we get to -1, there is nothing at index -1, so we'll break out of the loop, right? Now we can just loop and we could say if array at I is equal to search value, okay? If it's equal to search value, we can just return I. Done. We got it. We found it. If this condition is never met, that means that we went through the entire thing, we looped through the whole array, and we never found it. So outside, we just return -1. Any questions on this? Not too bad, in my opinion. This is the hardest part, where to start, I guess. You have to know to go from the back. Any question? Yell them out. You don't have to have questions, I'm just saying. If you do, yell them out. Otherwise, we'll continue. Okay, we will continue today's lesson. So I'm gonna talk about like 3 other methods. One of them is very tricky, and then I'm gonna talk about multi-dimensional arrays, and I'll get to that what that means in a bit. Okay, so there's one method I need you all to realize is concat. Okay, so let's say I have let array 1 is equal to an array of 1, 2, 3, right? And then let's say I have let array 2 is equal to array 1. We'll do array of 4, 5, 6, right? So then I say console.log array 1 dot concat array 2. Nope. What do we get over here? We get one array, okay? The concat method is kind of like plus equals, okay? It concatenates one array into another. However, let's say I set this to a variable. Let new array equal array1 dot concat array2, right? And then down here, I'll console.log new array, and then I will also console.log array1. As you can see, array1 has not changed. So what concat does behind the scenes is it creates a new array, and then it pushes everything from array1, the thing you're dotting off of, into that array. Then it takes whatever's over here and puts it into the back as well. This can also be like, you can also pass multiple things into them, and they don't always have to be arrays. It just puts everything inside of concat, everything in order, into a new array. Okay? But if it is an actual array, it takes out the elements inside. Okay? Any questions on concat? Pretty straightforward, I think. Everyone has their cameras off, so I don't really know if you guys are getting this or not. So I'll just keep going until I hear something.
Can you?
What's up?
Can you explain concat again? Yeah, but in a simpler way, I'm just not 100% sure if I follow.
So as you can see, like, forget this hello thing, right?
Okay.
As you can see, I have array1 here, right?
Right.
And array1 is an array. So arrays have these methods built into them, right? So there's this thing that exists on arrays called concat. So what concat does is when you invoke it with parentheses, what you pass in, let's say you pass in another array, okay? Now, what that will return, because it does return something, what it returns is a new array. It returns a new array of array1, which is the thing we're dotting off of, and array2, which is the thing we passed into concat, combined together in one array. All of the elements were taken out of their respective arrays and put into a new one array, okay? But as you can see, if we console.log array1 and array2, they still are the same. They're the same. They didn't change. What happened was a new array was made, and it was a combination of both.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it's not too, this isn't too difficult, so just like mull it over for a second, you'll get it. It's not that bad. Trust me. Cool. So another thing I want to go over is the join method, okay? So the join method is a little more difficult to wrap your head around, but it's actually super useful. So let's say I have, array of strings equal to an array, and then we have apple, oranges. Let's say array of fruits, right? Because that makes more sense. Cherries, and then we could do like bananas. Okay? So let's say I have this array, and then I'll just put in 100 at the end, just to show it's an array of different things, okay? So now, let's say I have let sentence equal array of fruits dot join, okay? The next method is the join method. So dot join, and I will pass into join a space, okay? And then I will console.log sentence, and I will console.log type of sentence, just to see what kind of type it is. It's a string, and as you can see, it is no longer an array. What join does when you dot off an array is it takes everything, each element one by one, and puts it into a new string. okay? Now you might be thinking, why did I put this space in here, right? What if I didn't put anything in here? Well, then I have these weird commas in here. Well, that's strange, right? You guys see the commas inside of the array? Inside of the string? I don't want that, right? But what if I just passed in an empty string? Well, then there's no spaces at all. What if I passed in these are fruits in all caps? Apple, these are fruits. Oranges, these are fruits. Cherries. So whatever you pass into join is the separator, okay? Well, not really the separator, but like, because it's not, well, it is. It's separating each, it is being put it is being put into between each element in the array when they were put into a string, okay? So if you put in an empty string, there won't be anything there. So what will be between all the elements of the array in the new string is nothing. However, if I put in this crazy sentence, then as you could see, that is being put in between every single element in the array, except the beginning and the end. It goes between, okay? Usually, I'm just showing you that you can put whatever you want in here, but usually we put a space, because what we want in an array is to space everything out, like make a real sentence, right? And that's how you do it. You put a space inside of join, and then what you get is the string. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense than before.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Nice. Yeah, join is really useful, and you'll be doing it a lot, okay? So that's one other method I wanted to show you. Now, this method is going to be a little complicated, okay? And honestly, people rarely use it because it gets a little wacky, but it is pretty useful. It has its use cases, and you'll see why, okay? This is called splice, okay? Splice sounds like slice, but don't get them confused because they're not the same at all, okay? They're just not the same. So let's say I have array of fruit again, right? And we'll say that's oranges, apples, bananas, and pears, okay? Let's say that I wanted to delete things from the middle of this array. Let's say I wanted to get rid of apples and bananas. You would do this by using splice, because that's what splice is for, okay? So let's say I say let deleted fruits equal array of fruits array of fruits dot splice, and like slice, the first argument will be the index of where to start. So if I said I wanted to delete apples and bananas, I would start at index 1. However, the second argument is not a stopping point. The second argument is how many things you want to delete, okay? So in this case, I want to delete apples and bananas. So that's 2 things, right? So I'm going to put it 2, okay? Now we will console.log deleted fruits. And we get an array of everything that was deleted, okay? However, this has a side effect. So like slice, how we were talking about, maybe Robin mentioned on Friday, how we were talking about slice is that it returns a copy of the array, right? Well, let's look at array of fruits. Array of fruits has changed. Splice mutates the original array. So it's not like, oh yeah, we'll just copy apples and bananas and put them in here. No. What is happening is it's actually being removed from the original array. And splice returns an array of the deleted objects, okay? There is another argument to splice. There is another optional argument to splice, okay? What if I put in something that I wanted in place, right? Now you can see that cherries is there. So what actually happens in Splice is the first thing it does is it takes it goes to where your starting index is, right? Which is here. At index 1 is now going to be cherries, okay? And then after whatever it is you put in, it deletes how many things, okay? So apples and bananas are gone. And cherries is wherever we started, okay? And I can add many things in here if I wanted to. Right? As you can see, cherries, grapes, and watermelon all got put at index 1 in the order I put them in, okay? So Splice takes multiple arguments of what you want to add as well. Also, we don't have to delete anything. I could delete 0 things. I can just add things into the middle. So as you can see now, I have cherries, I have oranges, cherries, grapes, watermelons, and then I have apples and bananas. So as you can see, the addition happens before the deletion, right? So nothing was deleted, but at index 1 was apples. However, Splice is being told to start at index 1, and then I have all these things after the delete count, which is the second argument, right? The 0 is the delete count. I'm deleting 0 things, so I'm just putting in all of these things, and then nothing is being deleted, right? What if I deleted 5, right? Then that means that it just goes until the end, like slice. Like if you try to slice something from 1 until infinite, until 1,000, and there's like 3 things in there, right? It would just slice off the end. That's it. Splice works the same way. Also, we have to put a start index though if we're deleting something. So that's how you get the first thing off, and then all these things. But usually you're only going to be adding 1 thing in. Okay, so this is a little complicated. There's a lot of side effects going on. The main thing that's happening, the main side effect that you have to be aware of what's going on is that array of fruits is actually changing. This bottom thing over here is array of fruits. I changed that, okay, using the splice method. And splice does return what you were deleting, okay, in an array. Okay, in an array. So as you can see, as you saw before, if I didn't have anything for the second argument, if I had a 0 for the second argument, it still returns an empty array. It's always is going to return an array, okay? However, since we didn't delete anything, nothing is being returned. Okay? Tricky. Trust me, it's tricky, okay? It was going to take a little practice, but, you know, so does everything. Any questions on Splice? All right. Okay. So before I go into slides and go over everything again in more depth, well, not really more depth, but, you know, just again, we're going to talk about multidimensional arrays. Multidimensional arrays are something you will all be experiencing a lot, okay? It's going to be a lot, all right? So let's say I have a grid, okay? It's going to be an array. And this is how we represent grids in computer science. This array is going to have 3 arrays inside of it, okay? This is a multi-dimensional array. I can just as easily write it like this if I wanted to, right? However, I'm saying that I'm declaring something that's called a grid. So I'm going to build a grid for you, and grids are more easily visualized like this, okay? So as you can see, this grid has 3 rows and 3 columns, right? The rows are represented by the actual arrays, right? So the rows, if I wanted to get like row 0, this row, I would say console.log grid at 0. And it's just like that, right? And we get the first row. However, if I wanted to get that first column, right? If I wanted to get that first column, I would have to say console.log. I would have to do it 3 times, right? However, this is grid 0, and then if I want this column, I would have to do grid 1, and then grid 2, right? 0, 1, 2. But how do I go deeper? How do I go into there and get the actual number? Because the columns are the actual numbers, right? So how do I get that number? It's easy. Of 0. Again, double bracket notation. That's how you get it, okay? And you see the 1, 1, 1. So as you can see, getting the first column, the thing that's changing is the first set of brackets. Because grid at 0 is here. Grid at 1 is the second array. And grid at 2 is the second array. Inside of all of those arrays, I want the 0th index. So that's why this is always like that. Okay? So like if I had... The main point here is accessing these things using double bracket notation. That's how you dive deeper into a multi-dimensional array. So if I wanted to, let's say, print out all of these numbers, I could do a for loop. I is less than grid.length. I++, right? So I'll loop through this grid. However, I'm going to write another for loop with something called j, and I'll say j is less than grid at I.length, okay? j++. And then I will console.log grid at I at j. Oh, let me comment this out. And then we get the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So what am I actually doing here? I just started going off on a tangent and I didn't really explain anything, right? So what's actually happening here? I'm looping through, I'm setting up this loop to run until until I is 0, I is less than the grid's length is no longer true. Well, what is the grid's length, right? If I console.log, if I did console.log grid.length, the grid's length is only 3, okay? But there's 9 things in here, right? Doesn't matter. The grid only has 3 elements in it. The grid is just one array, right? And that has 3 elements in it. They're just 3 arrays. Those inner arrays have 3 elements in them too. However, we can't access them with the length property over here. So how we dive deeper is by we loop through that, and now let's say I is at 0, right? So that means we're on this first element. Then we set up another for loop. So what is this for loop doing? Because of scoping purposes, I have to make another variable. So I'll say j, right? So I'll say j is 0 because this is an array and I need to loop through it, right? That current element is equal to grid at I, right? And grid at I is this array, and that's what I have to loop through. So I have to go through that current L. Right. And then inside of that loop, now I'll be going through that 1, 2, 3. So how do I access that 1, 2, 3 grid of I, which is just current L, right, of j? Because grid of I is just going to be 1, 2, 3, right? So that array at j, which would be 0, then 1, then 2, and then this would stop. We would make it down here, and then we would repeat. Okay? Does that make sense?
Can you explain again why you have to put the double 0, like 1, 0?
This?
Yes.
So like here, let's go over what is grid of 0 of 0. What is grid of 0? Grid of 0 is this array, right? Grid of 0 is that array, and then of 0 again, right? Another bracket notation. So we go inside of this array, and we get the 0th element. The 0th element of this array, and then the 0th element of this array, right? So that's that 1. So we'll get a 1 here. Down here, we do grid of 1 of 0, right? So grid of 1 isn't this first element anymore, it's the second one at the first index, right? So grid of 1 is going to be this array. Grid of 1 at 0. This array at 0. So that's why we get another one here. And then so on and so forth, right? Grid of 2, this is at the second index of 0. So this is still an array, right? This whole thing. So we get to that point, we get to that inner array by saying grid at 2, right? Grid at 2 would be at index 2, which is going to be the third array, right? And then we access that inner array, inside of that inner array, those inner elements, by doing another bracket notation. Because, and since I said let's get the first column, that's always going to be 0. It's always going to be the 0th element.
Thank you.
Does that make more sense?
Yes.
Yeah, so like, let's not talk about numbers anymore, right? Like if I just had let array equal like an array of hello 44 and an array of false and true, right? Let's say I wanted to pull out that true, right? Let's bool equal array at 0, 1, 2. This entire array is at index 2. So that's at array 2 of 1. So I'll console.log bool, and we get true. If we change this to false, to 0, we will get false. Because at 2 would be this entire array, okay? This entire array. So because it's an array, we can go deeper into it. Let's say that was an array. Let's say it was an array with false and then another array, right? So 2 at 1 would be an array with true. 2 at 1 at 0 would just be true. And as you can see, this can go on forever, and we don't need to really talk about that. We're only going to deal with like one level right now. Okay? So that's how you access inner elements. Double bracket notation. Bracket notation stacks. Because think about it. Array of 2 is really just this array. So you can kind of just delete this thing and then put false, true, right? And false true at 1 is true. So you can delete this. You can delete this and it'll just be true, right? I don't know if that makes it more complicated or not, but sometimes that makes more sense. Any questions? Okay. So let's talk about these slides a little bit, okay? So let's talk about the splice method again first. Splice mutates the original array, okay? It's used to add or remove elements from the middle of an array instead of adding or removing them from either side, right? Using push, pop, shift, and unshift, that's very limiting, right? You can only get the first or last thing off or put something at the back or in the front. Splice lets you put things in the middle wherever you want pretty much. It's more freedom. Its first argument is an index. The second is a count of elements to delete, and then at the starting point of the provided index, right? And it returns a new array of the removed elements, okay? So let's say we have this names array, George, John, Thomas, and we have let single term precedence equal names dot splice of 1 and 1. So what's actually going to happen before we see what happens? So the first argument is a 1, right? So that's our starting index. So index 0, index 1. So that'll be John. And the second argument is another 1. So that's how many things will be deleted. So we'll be deleting one thing. So we start at John. So we'll be deleting John. So single term precedence should be an array of just John. And I'm correct, right? It's just an array of just John. But as you can see, John has been taken out of names. Okay? Any questions on how this works?
So the first is
Starting point. The first
the starting
is
point,
the
and the
starting
second one is
the delete
the.
count. How many things you're deleting from
So
your
by
starting
saying
point.
that, you will delete John.
Yes, because we start at index 1, which is John. So we're
Zero,
at
okay.
John, and we're saying how
And what
many...
if I want to delete the 3 of them? Just put number 3 now, because that will be Thomas.
If we want to delete all 3 of them, we would start at 0 and then put 3. Start at the
Okay.
beginning with 0 and then put how many things you want out. And it's including where you're starting, right? That's why at 1, we're starting at John, and we have John here, and then how many things deleting? 1. So 1, get rid of John. Done.
If I want to eliminate Thomas, it will be 2 and then comma 2.
No. If we want... Oh, wait. Just Thomas?
Yes.
If we wanted to just eliminate Thomas, it would be 2, comma 2. No, 2, comma 1. You can actually do, since Thomas is the end of the array, we start at 2, right? We start at Thomas, and then you could put in 100. It doesn't matter, because it'll just go until the end of the array. However,
Okay.
if you to be precise, though, if you just wanted Thomas, it would be 2, 1.
Now I understand. Thank you.
No problem.
So let me see if I get this straight. You just explained that to get rid of John, you put 1, comma 1. For Thomas, 2, comma 1, and I'm assuming that if I want to get rid of George, it would be 0, comma 1, right?
Yep.
The run is like, what does the one at the end here represent again?
The second one?
Yeah, the second one.
The second one is the delete count. How many
the
things
delete
you
count.
will be deleted.
Okay.
Yeah. I feel like that's the major gotcha with Splice. Once you realize that the second argument is just how many things you'll be deleting, it kind of gets easier. But since Splice sounds like slice, you kind of think that it's representing an index. Always. You're always going to do that. I know that for a fact that you will all do that. However, the second argument is not an ending point. The second argument is how many things you're deleting. Okay? And names changes. That's the other gotcha. Names is changing.
I got it.
Awesome. Any other questions, anyone? Dope. So let's say we have names Paul, George, John, Ringo. That across the universe would be names.splice 1, 2. So what is across the universe going to be? Starting at the first the first argument is where we start, right? So starting at index 1, which is George. So it's going to be an array, and then we're deleting 2 things. So it'll be George and John, right? Because we're starting at George, and we're deleting 2 things, George and John. So the names should just be Paul and Ringo, right? Right. Paul, Ringo, because we got rid of George and John in Across the Universe, in that splice. And that takes them out of names and changes names forever. It mutates names, okay? And Across the Universe will be George and John. Any questions?
You said that the number n represents the number of elements you get rid of.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So that means you get rid of 2. 2.
Mm-hmm.
2.
Yep.
And the one here is supposed to represent George.
The 1
right.
represents the index that we're starting, right? So that
right.
at index 1 would be George.
Oh, okay, I so you know.
Exactly. So the 1 is the index of where to start, right? So whatever, it doesn't have to be George. It's not really linked to that name. It's just linked to the thing that's at that index, which happens to be George. So we start at George, and then the second argument is the 2, right? So we start at George, and since it's 2, we delete George, and then we also delete John, because that's coming next.
Oh, okay. I get it now.
Right. Not too bad. Not too bad once you like really mull things over. However, it's tricky. I'll give it to you. It's tricky. Okay? You can also optionally add new elements at the given index. And this is what kind of makes it really tricky, right? So let's say I've let names Paul, George, Pete, John, right? Let former members equal names.splice. So that means that members is going to be an array, right? Former members will be an array. Names.splice 2. Okay, so let's start at index 2. That's Paul, George, Pete. Okay, Pete is at index 2. So we're going to be starting at Pete. How many things were we deleting? We're deleting one thing. So Pete is gone. Now there's a third argument. So hold on. I just got rid of Pete. Ringo is now put in Pete's place. Ringo is put at index 2. Okay? Whatever is over here, and let's say I had 10 other things over here, it doesn't matter. Those things will be put at this index. Okay? So as you can see, when we console.log names, we have Ringo at index 2 in names. And then former members is just an array with Pete inside. It always returns an array. Any questions? Cool. You also do not have to remove any elements. So you can just be adding however many things you want, right? So now we have let removed elements equal names.splice 2. We're starting at index 2, so that's 0, 1, 2, that's Ringo. And then we were saying 0. So that means we're not getting rid of anything. However, even though we didn't get rid of anything, you can see that Pete and Stuart are put before Ringo. Because Ringo was at index 2, but Splice is saying we're starting at index 2, and since we're adding things, whatever was there before is now moving over. Because now we have things that we need to put at that start index, okay? And removed elements is still going to be an empty array. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Nice. A lot of weird and wacky things you could do with Splice. But let's switch gears and talk about join for a bit more. So join concatenates the elements of an array into a string. The original array is not changed, okay? So if I have let names Paul, George, John, Ringo, let join string equal names.join. As you can see, it's a string, and then we have Paul, comma, George, comma, John, comma, Ringo. If you do not pass anything into join, the commas that are separating array elements are still going to be inside of the string, okay? So we add a separator, and we pass that into join, okay? So now we can see that instead of those commas, all the elements of the original array are being separated by the thing we passed into John, which was space and space. So as you can see, now I have a nice looking sentence over there. Paul and George and John and Ringo. Does this make sense? I feel like join is a little straightforward. But if you need me to repeat anything, please let me know. I'll be happy to go over it again. Okay. And then we have the concat method, right? Concat merges 2 or more arrays into one, and it returns a new array, and it doesn't change the old one, okay? So let older equal Ringo, John, and then younger is Paul, George, right? So we have 2 arrays. Ringo and John is in the older variable, and then the younger variable is an array of Paul and George. All together now, we have older.concat younger. So as you can see, all together now is one array with older and younger. All the elements inside of them were just merged together. They're just merged, right? And as you can see, the younger is at the back. okay? And as you can see, older is the same. Older did not change, okay? This is actually pretty straightforward. Maybe I didn't explain it correctly before, but think of it as just merging arrays into one. But it doesn't affect any other array. It makes a new one. Any questions on concat? Any questions on concat? Okay. Nested arrays. Arrays can contain any type of value, and that's including other arrays. So we say let related things equal an array, and that related things array has a length of 2, because it has one array and then another array inside of it. At index 0, we have an array with 2 things inside of it, Windows, Mac OS. Then we have at index 1, another array with 2 things inside of it, New York and Chicago, right? So if I say console.log related things at 0, console.log related things of 1 of 0, and then console.log the length, as you can see, related things at 0 is an array of 2 things, right? That makes sense, because at element 0 is an array. So that's what we get when we console.log related things at 0. Line 6 is a little different, right? We're saying console.log related things at 1, which is that array, but then we put in that 0 and we get New York, okay? So that is how you access inner elements in a nested array. You stack the bracket notation, okay? You stack that, so we have of 1, which is the first index array, of 0, which is the 0th element. But as you can see, even though you see 4 strings on the screen, the length of related things is actually 2, because it's only 2 arrays. An array can hold millions and millions of things. However, it is still always one element. It is still one array that is holding this thing. Does that make sense?
So related things is one array,
Yep.
but it has 2 arrays inside it.
Yep. That's why you see that the length is 2, right? Those 2 arrays can hold an infinite amount of things. However, related things will always have 2 things inside of it.
Yeah, thanks.
No problema. So let's say I wanted to console.log everything inside of RSVP groups, right? What is RSVP groups? RSVP groups is one array with 3 things inside of it, okay? At the 0th index is an array with 2 names. At the first index is just the name Jack. And at the second index is an array of 3 names, okay? So we'll start off looping like regular. We'll loop through RSV groups because we have to hit every index of RSV groups array, right? And then we'll pull out that thing and we'll put it into an element variable, right? Just to make things easier for us. And we're not sure if this is going to be a string or an array. So now we will use our method that you guys learned on Friday, array.isArray. So if array.isArray and we pass in the element. So this will return true if it's an array. If it is an array, we will start another for loop. We'll say let j equal 0, j is less than element.length, because element is that inner array that we'll be looping through, right? We already determined that it's an array, so we'll be looping through it here. We'll say let name equal element of j, and we will console.log name, okay? And that is what will happen inside of that for loop if that element is an array. Else, that means if this is not an array, so if this is an array, do this. Else, if it's not, we can just console.log the element, because we know that it's going to be a name. And as you can see, then we get all the names like that. Any questions?
Yeah, that I didn't really get that much.
Okay, let me do it again, right? So we understand that this is an array of 3 things, right?
Yes.
3 things. One array is at 0th index, one string is at the first index, and one array is at the second index, right? So let's say I wanted to loop through this thing and then console.log each name. Because as humans, we can tell that there's names inside of here, right? But we don't know if the element is going to be an array or not, right? So if I loop through RSVP groups like normal, and I pull out that RSVP group of I, right? That will be either this array, this string, or this array. So then I will say if array.isArray of that element, right? We pass in something to array.isArray, and what we get back is true or false. If it's true, that means we have an array. So if we are at Jane Mel, right? Jane Mel would be element at this point. Don't we have to loop through that array as well? Because it's an array, right? We don't know how many things are in there. So we have to just loop through that array as well. So that's what this inner for loop is doing starting on line 6. That element would be Jane Mel. We would start J at 0, and then we will say name is going to be element, which is Jane Mel, at J. J would be 0, so that element is Jane Mel at 0 would be Jane. So we see that in here. Then we get Mel, because J increments here. Then J is 2, so we break out of the loop, because this has 2 elements, and J has to be less than 1. So then we will continue to line 9. We will skip over this else, because this was true, and then we will continue the outer loop, okay? Now, the outer loop was at 0 this whole time. I was at 0 that whole time. Now I is 1. So what is RSVP groups of 1? It's Jack, right? So is array.isArray of Jack true? No. Jack is a string, right? It's not an array. So this will be false. So we'll go into this else, and then we will console.log element, which is Jack. So then, after this else, we will increment I again, I++, now we are at 2. So then we get to this array with 3 people in it, right? So we say, array.isArray of this element. True. This is an array. So now we will enter our if statement, and we will do a loop on that inner array. That inner array we will loop through. J will be initiated at 0. We will get Rohan, then we'll increment it to 1. We will get David, then we'll increment it to 2. We will get Meg, then we'll increment it to 3. And then we will break out of the loop. We break out of this loop. We finish this if statement. We skip over the else. And then we increment I again. And now I is 3, and we can break out of that as well. So now we have all of these things in the console.
Perfect. I understand just one thing. I understand everything but one thing.
Yeah.
Why do you put name on the console.log name
Here?
on the if?
This is completely like up to you. You know how sometimes you pull out, like how we're pulling out element here, RSVP groups of I. Name is equivalent to RSVP groups bracket I bracket J.
Okay.
Because RSVP groups bracket I is element, right? So element bracket J would be RSVP groups bracket I bracket J, right? So element bracket J would be that inner thing. And I'm just taking that out and putting it into a name variable here in console.log name. It's just taking out these things, putting them into more sensible variable names, and then we console log it. We could have used RSVP groups of I everywhere that we see element, and then where we see name would be RSVP groups of I of J.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, you just gave the name, so
Yeah,
you can understand that it's a name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we just changed it to name because we know that this inner element is going to be a name. Whereas here, we gave the name element because we don't know if this is an array or a name. So we'll just call it an element. However, down here, we know that this is going to be a name.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So nested arrays are used to represent grid in code, okay? Inner arrays represent the rows of the grid. And each index of the rows represents a column. So this is what I showed you before, right? So we have grid, grid, and then we have 3 arrays inside that grid, right? And we have inside of those arrays, we have three things. So if I say let first column equal grid, let first column equal an array, and then we should do grid at 0 at 0, grid at 1 at 0, grid at 2 at 0, we would get 1, 1, 1, right?
Right.
Right. This isn't too complicated. If we wanted the second thing, if we wanted the second column, we would do grid at 0 at 1, grid at 1 at 1, grid at 2 at 1. When we see this down here, when we see grid at 0, right? The first 0 is representing the row. The second 0 is representing the column. Okay? Row, column, row, column. So as you can see, we have the 0th column, but the row changes as we go down, right? So as a recap, we talked about the Moore methods and the nested arrays. But before we're done, we're going to talk about the Sudoku project, which will be available to you after I'm done talking, okay? So like we said before, this is 100% optional, okay? I do not care if you do this. However, I really recommend it, okay? You're going to get some great practice, especially with arrays, and it's just going to be nice building something a little bigger than these workshop problems, right? So instructions will be available in LearnDot. Don't forget to write tidy code. And what you do is if you do this in like a REPL or you do it in like a file, like in VS Code or something like that, or in CodePen, wherever you're writing code, you could just send me the link or send me the file or Robin, whatever, and we will look at it. We will write comments above all of your functions that you have to write, and then we'll send it back to you and let you know what we think. Okay? So it says send your solution to the instructors by the end of next Thursday. Send them whenever you want. Send them after this course is over. I really don't care. I'll always be looking at it. All right?
So with this,
Yeah.
you just have to grade as Sudoku from 0.
Say that again?
What do you have to do exactly like this? You just have to.
It's going to be
build
like,
it from zero.
do you know like where all the workshops are in LearnDot? One of the workshops will be your Sudoku project, so there'll be instructions in there on what exactly you need to do. Essentially, what you're going to be doing, though, is you're going to be like creating a function that will check a Sudoku board and see if it's right or wrong.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions?
Nope.
Nice.